There is nothing quite like seeing a character you desperately wanted for Smash Bros. Actually getting in. Any and all video game fans want that high that comes from getting the representation they craved, and I am certainly no exception. I've had a number of characters I wanted to see in Smash get in somehow, and therefore have felt that high. But for many years, there was no character I wanted in Smash Bros. More than Mega Man. Oh my god, when that reveal trailer finally dropped. I was already hyped for Smash 3DS and Wii U, but Mega Man being one of the first newcomers revealed gave me more reasons to be stoked. But something I couldn't help but notice about all the people getting a fighter they wanted in Smash, you ever see how many of them actually use that character on a regular basis? Seems to me like the rush of seeing a character you want get into Smash immediately dies as soon as you actually play them. I'm sure there are variances, but for me, Mega Man was kind of the same case. I talked before about the lack of ranged fighters in Smash Bros., but Mega Man was the game changer, having most of his attacks being projectiles, even his basic 3-hit combo. But like the Belmonts, Mega Man is difficult to use for someone like me who prefers close quarters smashing. It doesn't help that watching so many videos about Mega Man's moveset using weapons from dozens of robot masters makes an obsessed boy lose a bit of excitement over the moves, even when actually using him. Still has one of the coolest final smashes, bringing in all the different Mega Men, and Proto Man and Bass, for some reason, kinda clashing the style. Okay, it used to be better. There's a lot about the technical side of Smash Bros. That goes completely over my head, in case I haven't already made that clear. But if my not making Marth and Lucina a tie is any indication, there are some things I do notice. And another thing that I've noticed is that out of all of the veteran Smash Bros. Fighters, Samus Aran has had quite an inconsistent streak. She started out as a very mediocre fighter in Smash 64, became much more formidable in Melee, went back to being a bulky, slow powerhouse, presumably to further separate herself from her Zero Suit version, then went back to being decent in Smash 3DS and Wii U. Ultimate is perhaps the most interesting, because rather than go back to the downgraded version of Samus, they gave us both versions. Given the fan reception to Echo Fighters, there probably wouldn't have been too much pushback with making Dark Samus a direct clone of Samus like the Princesses and Belmonts, but they didn't. In both animations and gameplay, Dark Samus is a bit slower and floatier than the real Samus. While I appreciate making the fighters different, the floatiness makes Dark Samus feel more sluggish than I'd like. The attacks, especially the projectiles, are the same, so I can't knock her too much. Plus, she has some really cool palette swaps that look so good. But still, playing her makes me sound like Brawl haters, what with all the floatiness. So, not great. Considering what I've said about Samus's fluctuating quality throughout the Smash Bros. Series, and confirming I prefer her over her Phazon counterpart, you'd think I'd immediately start talking about her at this point in the countdown. And you would be right. Sorry, I want to try and jazz things up a little, but sometimes I actually am predictable. To actually talk about the moveset we've glanced at, Samus is a fairly decent powerhouse who stands out for particularly hard-hitting special attacks. While her bombs are nearly useless, her charge shot and missiles are great zoning tools, and her screw attack is so very potent. While her moveset has been consistent throughout the series, the degree of movement has been different, with her worst versions basically being Dark Samus in regards to sluggish floatiness. Her recent incarnations, with armor based off an unpopular Metroid game I myself am fond of, have been her best outings, with speed that doesn't contain any percentage of molasses. And Ultimate didn't even need to do anything different but give her the ability to charge her neutral special in the air, which I didn't even notice she couldn't do until Smash 3DS and Wii U. I don't know how I missed that. That should have been obvious. There are other projectile specialists I prefer, one in particular with actually useful bombs, but I can at least see Ultimate Samus as a competent fighter. Can't go around committing genocide on deadly parasites without being able to own in a fight. Now, if she could just implement the Zero Laser into that equation, that would certainly be something, cause my god, that final smash. I know I've made myself sound enough like a contradiction already, especially with how I love the idea of ranged fighters and platform fighters, but have a hard time using them. So imagine how strange it'll sound when I say that I think it's weird that the Inklings play the way they do in Smash Bros. Don't get me wrong, I love that they got in Smash at all, as predictable as it may be, but I can't be the only one who was expecting a long-distance fighter like Mega Man, with the splatter shot being their neutral attack rather than their neutral special. It just feels kind of wrong that they have decent close range options, rather than more specialized in distance. Nitpicking aside, the fact that Inkling isn't as much of a ranged fighter as Mega Man or the Belmonts make them easier for me to use. The range is limited to their specials, though I believe their smash attacks have some distance to them, at least a little. The trickiest thing with Inkling is the fact that they reload ink in a weird way that I imagine most casual players don't know. And if you're watching this video and you don't know, hold the shield button, L or R, and hold B button. You're welcome. I know this from watching interviews with Sakurai, but the thing that goes over my head the most is their side special. The ink roller is supposed to be a way to make opponents vulnerable to follow up with attacks, but I still don't know how to get out of the roller fast enough. Do you tap B? Do you let go of B? Jump? Dodge? How? And why have I not figured it out all these years later? Well, whatever. Inkling is a fine fighter overall, and I really need to play more Splatoon. I do really miss that game. A big reason Fire Emblem was lesser known back in the day was that the earlier games were exclusive to Japan, though localization isn't the only factor that can affect a game's popularity. And arguably one of the biggest factors in that is if so few people heard of the game around the time the game came out, and maybe never heard of it at all, well, after the fact. I don't know the full story of Earthbound's release, but I've heard quite a bit about the weird marketing campaign in the West, making the game out to be one worth skipping. I guess self-depreciating ads were a little too ahead of their time? Thanks Sakurai and Super Smash Bros. For bringing obscure boy Ness into a more popular game to get people talking about Earthbound, especially considering it's supposed to be a really good game. To outside observers like myself, Ness is a curious tyke with his baseball bat and yo-yo and his inexplicable psychic powers, most of which apparently are used by his friends and not by him. His PSI powers give him an interesting range game, and with all of his different projectiles and ability to absorb enemy projectiles to heal. His PK Thunder is especially tricky as you have to hit yourself with it in order to recover. A big reason I didn't play as him much in the past was because of this, as it made him even scarier to use than Jigglypuff or even Yoshi. However, I've gotten over it. For one, I've gotten a lot of practice with PK Thunder, and I'm quite a pro at using it. At least to recover in most situations. There's also the fact that everything else about Ness balances him out to make him a formidable fighter. His smash attacks don't have a lot of oomph to them, but his specials are a real highlight. It's easy to see why online Ness players spam PK Fire. That's sweet, sweet damage. Now, what do you get when you take Fire Emblem's initial localization issue and shove that in with the Earthbound or Mother series? You get Mother 3, a very popular game that many people outside of Japan know about and love the story and want to play, but Nintendo just won't localize it. I can't remember the reason they might have given, but I know it's stupid and they should just do it, because now the only story we have to go off of for Lucas is the Subspace Emissary, which is a great story, especially for Lucas, but still. Oh well, on to Lucas and Smash Bros. It's interesting to note that he was planned to replace Ness as early as Melee. I'm glad it didn't happen, because referred to my rant on Jigglypuff and the original Smash 64 fighters, but as we can see here, I wound up liking Lucas a bit more. Admittedly, his specials are a bit of a mixed bag compared to Ness. While I prefer Ness's PK Fire, Lucas's PK Freeze has its pros with different speed and angle, and I especially love how his PK Thunder can hit multiple times before being used up. But the thing that sells me more to Lucas is his smash attacks. Lucas uses more PSI powers, and a stick, and a pet snake apparently, and they have a bit more power to them, especially his ludicrously strong up smash. A proper balance of normal attacks and special attacks is the key to separating the pros from the noobs, but between the two, normal attacks are the ones to try and make use of, especially for combos, so in that regard, Lucas has the leg up on Ness, at least for me. Now, if Nintendo could just open their eyes and give us the game people actually want, come on, make me have to put an extra note in this segment to celebrate the Western release of Mother 3. Please? I have to imagine, at least for a time before the internet, how annoying it must have been for Sheik mains in Melee to have to pick Zelda in the character selection screen and lose precious time in a match to change. It was nice of the developers of Brawl to have Sheik chilling with Zelda in the character selection screen so you can pick which one to start from. But why the hell didn't they do this for Zero Suit Samus? I had to look it up as I was writing the script, and there's a button input, but it's not common knowledge, and they could have just did the Zelda Sheik thing on the character select screen. So in battles, I had to hope to get a Smash Ball in order to get the opportunity to play as Zero Suit Samus even for just a little bit. The only consistent time I ever really had to play as her was in Subspace Emissary, and I did replay that mode a lot, and it wasn't nearly enough time to get a good impression of her. I am so happy that they made all these lady separate fighters, especially so I could actually figure out what I felt about the less armored version of Samus Aran. All in all, if it were the Brawl version, she'd probably be lower. She wasn't as much of a powerhouse compared to her clothed version, relying more on acrobatics and a paralyzing pistol that doubles as a whip, for some reason. After Brawl, she got some heals with jet power, made her recovery better, and gave her some extra strength kicks. While Power Suit Samus had her specials to give her range, I feel like Zero Suit Samus can get a fairly decent amount of range for most of her attacks. Not projectile range per se, but mid-range gets a lot of mileage, at least I say. And I couldn't care less about whatever dumb argument people have about the heals. I focus on results. And those results are much better attacks, and especially a better recovery. It's interesting what something as simple as character select screen design can change in the grand scheme of things. With fighters like Pikachu, I didn't have much of an excuse, but Zero Suit Samus made me feel like I was really missing out. That and a good pair of shoes, those are nice too. I may have been late to the internet trends in regards to Super Smash Bros., but I was around early enough to see everyone in their Aunt Pearl rip on Brawl for not being Melee, and I never really understood why. Even to this day, I still think it was a bit excessive. There was so many more fighters, stages, items, and game modes. There was a cinematic adventure mode. They at least tried adding online play, and more importantly, random tripping was not that bad. But, despite my confusion about popular Smash Bros. Ideologies, I wonder if my ignorance might actually be a blessing. I mean, even in the Brawl heyday, I didn't put a whole lot of stock into Meta Knight. I liked him well enough, but I was more impressed by other flashier newcomers. But if you asked anyone that was actually in the know, they'd tell you that Meta Knight was an unbridled force of destruction, ruling the skies and eviscerating anyone and everyone with vicious sword attacks so brutal and deadly that he was one of the few characters to actually be banned in official tournaments. Apparently. That's right, folks, it didn't start with Bayonetta. I mean, sure, I have an easier time seeing it after messing around a teeny bit with Meta Knight and Brawl, but even then, I never went out of my way to break the game or decimate anyone in Smash like Meta Knight apparently can, and I don't see a reason to start now. I will say that I definitely noticed the difference afterwards. I was honestly surprised Sakurai and his team were willing to bring back Meta Knight after that showing. Maybe there is some Kirby favoritism after all. But the caveat is that they slapped some fancy metal gloves on him and drastically reduced his jumping ability. He's still quick and has solid combo potential, but he feels like he put on a little weight. One of these days, I should go back to Brawl and use Meta Knight again while he was in his prime. Maybe I'll sing a different tune. But for now, I have the lesser version to refer to, and it's not terrible. His recovery special is substantially less awkward to use. That's an interesting way he's better now. Everyone loves to complain about too many Fire Emblem reps in Smash Bros., but no one bats an eye at Mario and Pokemon for hogging a decent chunk of the roster. I guess they justify it with Mario being Nintendo's baby and Pokemon having new reps from the most current generation at the time. From a combination of my own experience playing Sun and Moon and Pokken Tournament's updated roster, I was hyped for the idea of Decidueye getting a cool new grass-type fighter. I was comparatively less enthused about the idea of Incineroar, mostly due to Litten being the most boring of the Alola starters for me, fight me. But then I saw Incineroar in action and heard Sakurai really wanted to add add a wrestling fighter in Smash Brothers. And that was all it took for me. Making a wrestling fighter, especially a heel, is a fun idea, and Incineroar encapsulates why. Big and wide attacks to blow fighters away, lots of grabs, a fun showboating attitude, and taunts or tantrums when he lands or misses a hit. His specials are a ton of fun too, and his Alolan Whip is satisfying and surprisingly not that difficult to pull off. Get his weird power-up counter in that mix and you have a satisfying KO. I really want to rank Incineroar higher on this list, but the unfortunate truth is that I'm not very good with him. And I mean really not good with him. Weirdly more so than other fighters I love, but am not good with, as we'll see later down this list. I think I'm getting better, but I'm not confident enough to bust him out in a serious online match. But hey, I'll never say the idea behind Incineroar in Smash was a terrible idea from the start. Nice to add even a little more justification to pick boring old Litten as a starter, huh? So how far along are we now? 42? What's half of 82? 41? So we're close to halfway, right? Just under, that's close enough. I'd say middle of the ranking is an appropriate place to put the Mii fighters. And with a fanbase like Smash Brothers, where everyone is demanding some character or another to be added, the Miis are a great inclusion, because you can make whoever you want. And with 3 flavors of Mii fighters with multiple different specials to set them up with, there's a lot of possibilities with them. I'm lumping them all together, but I do have preferences. My least favorite would be the Mii Sword Fighter. They have a solid balance of range options, but attack-wise, they don't really do much for me compared to the other two. My second favorite is the Mii Gunner. They have great ranged attacks, and I love all the explosive options for their specials, but of all of these Gunner ranged fighters, they're the easiest for me to handle. And my favorite out of all of them is the Mii Brawler, fast with plenty of powerful close range options to pummel the competition. All of the custom options for the Mii fighters balance out the pros and cons enough to warrant the middle of the ranking, but for me, I feel like it would make more sense to put them in the bottom of the list. I've said before that I love everything random in Smash Brothers, and that reliance on random has a surprisingly sad side effect. The Mii fighters aren't part of the random character selection. You have to manually pick the Mii fighters if you want to see them in a fight, and with how often I use random, I damn near never see the Miis. Add in the fact that the Miis can be used in Ultimate's Classic mode, it feels like they're kind of an afterthought. Which I guess feels right considering the roster, but what the Mii fighters are as a whole, it's kinda tragic. I'll rank the Mii fighters higher than I should, as an acknowledgement of what the Miis bring to the table, and hopefully this can help motivate me to use them more. I mean, hell, because of the Mii's Sans is in Smash, that's gotta count for something. It might be a bit of a spoiler if I decide to rank the fighters in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, but one of my favorite characters in that game is Heihachi Mishima. His combo game is stellar despite his lack of ranged options, and he has the best and funniest level 3 supers in the game. It might be surprising to hear considering how I ranked the Street Fighter reps, and it may be surprising with how mid I'm ranking Heihachi's own son. I think in regards to fighting game reps, PlayStation All-Stars really benefited from having a bigger set of attacks for fighters, really fit in all of the attacks and combos that come with traditional fighting games, especially Tekken. Sakurai managing to cram so many attacks into Kazuya is yet another example of an incredible character made for Smash Brothers. But it does come with the cost of having to remember all the combo options. I went out of my way to figure out Kazuya's dashing, uppercut, and spin kick attacks purely because I spammed the crap out of those moves with Heihachi in PlayStation All-Stars. Anything else, I have absolutely no recollection how to use them. On the one hand, it makes me feel like I'm barely scratching the surface of what Kazuya can really do. But on the other hand, you honestly don't really need to use every tool in his toolkit to thrive. His standard moves and specials, especially if you can make use of his rage, are plenty to make Kazuya a solid fighter, and not trying out all of his combos actually makes him that much easier to use than Ryu and Ken. I feel less distracted overall. Now, if only we could keep watching Kazuya dropping fighters off of cliffs. I can't get enough of that. With what I feel about Kazuya, he should be my favorite of the traditional fighting game characters in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Having such an impressive number of attacks, yet enough strengths to not even need them all to thrive, makes for a great sounding fighter. But using all of the fighters nearly back to back shows some common ground among them, in part their lack of mobility. Kazuya's devil wings are handy, but it still feels like moving around is restrictive. I wouldn't say there's that big of a difference between the fighters' mobility, but Ken and Terry are a bit more noticeable. Couple that with a couple of extra tools, and there's a compelling case for the SNK fighter that I'd never heard of before. Sorry, I don't really play SNK games. I knew Metal Slug existed. That counts for something, right? Terry Bogard brings along not only slightly better mobility and the same Street Fighter command inputs, but brings a couple extra tricks. 2 side specials, a front and back, with their own inputs, a unique input for his up special that's actually really easy to remember, a spot dodge attack, and a pair of super specials with more than one input and devastating power. And among the other fighting game characters, I actually almost forget that Terry has the original command inputs. The normal B-button specials are potent enough on their own. Even then, the rising tackle input is easy to remember, and I can get his super specials by button mashing. Way easier than the Sure You Can. But I think the thing that really makes Terry the best fighting game character in Smash is his combo game. All of his attacks and specials blend into each other so seamlessly. Even landing his final smash is simple if you just get to someone and smack them around a little. And this is coming from someone who is fairly notorious in whiffing all of his final smashes. Kazuya may have quantity on his side, but Terry has a bit more quality, and that makes all the difference. Maybe I should try a Fatal Fury game someday. So hey, does anyone else remember when 2020 started and everybody was being a fucking baby about Byleth getting into Smash Brothers? Boy am I glad I wasn't on Twitter when that went down. I swear, people will get explosively angry over the stupidest things. Even if there are better picks than Byleth, and even if there are one too many Fire Emblem reps, the vitriol that was thrown around was so undeserved. People forget that it's not all about any preconceived ideas about what makes a fighter deserving to be put in Smash. It's also about what the developers think they can do as a fighter. If the fighter is fun to make, as Sakurai himself put it. With all that in mind, you may believe Byleth is one of my favorite fighters added. Well, I like them more than Marth. Though I do still think Byleth has a lot going for them. Being a Fire Emblem rep that managed to bring weapons other than just a sword to Smash is no small feat at this point. Fail Not is a powerful ranged tool, and the strength of Ymir is ridiculous. And yet, with so many powerful tools, Byleth has a bit of an issue with range and closing the distance between himself and their enemies. That bow has reach, yeah, but even an uncharged shot is slow. Their mobility is not great, so I feel like I really have to hoof it compared to other fighters with a similar move style. Add in a final smash with weak visuals, it's literally just a Sothis PNG, and you have a bit of missed potential in a fighter that has a lot of promise. They're still fantastic, and I will defend to the death their right to be in Smash Brothers. But I can still want for more, even just a little. Just put the salt to the side, please. You want to know a really weird thing I've done with Byleth? It's compare them to Ike. Okay, hear me out on this. I talked about Byleth not being super reliable in regards to range and closing the distance to enemies. While not having any projectiles, Ike is a similar sort of character, beyond the whole also being from Fire Emblem thing. A beefy fighter with not great mobility and strong offensive power. What sets Ike apart is that while he doesn't have projectiles, he has specials that get him to move. I do get a kick out of Byleth's tether recovery, especially when you use it to grab people instead of the edge. But I defy you to tell me Ether isn't the best recovery special just for the spectacle of it. But more than that is his side special, Quick Draw. He can charge up a dashing strike that can carry him across the stage. If Ether is too risky of a recovery option, or you're a little more to the side of the stage rather than either above or below it, this can more than make up for that. Having the option to quickly dash in and out of a fight as a heavyweight is a godsend, and it's enough to rate Ike higher than Byleth in my eyes. But on his own, besides the recovery thing, Super strong sword, fire adding a nice bit of spice, especially with a fully charged eruption. His final smash is flashy as all hell. His OG voice actor did a fantastic job, though his new VA is decent too. And again, I point out his recovery special. My god. Seriously though, who doesn't love a good ether? Like, come on, that's too good. Next time someone complains about Fire Emblem reps in Smash Bros., just remind them that ether exists and tell them to shut the hell up. I talked before how it wasn't until Smash 3DS and Wii U that I realized I wasn't a big fan of Sheik despite popular opinion, but I think it's about time I circle back to that conversation. Speed is great in Smash Bros., but so is being able to knock your opponent or opponents out, and in that regard, Zelda has a leg up on her ninja cosplay version. I don't know if it's just more of those unnoticeable differences between Smash games, or if everybody was just sleeping on Zelda for the past 20 years, including myself, mind you. I was not very good with Zelda for a time, like with Pikachu, though part of that is because of the whole Sheik thing. As a separate fighter, I could devote more time to using her, and after getting a handle on her playstyle, I realized I was kinda missing out. All of her magic is versatile and strong in their own ways. We all love to spam Din's fire, and her recovery is surprisingly tough. But I think we've all been sleeping on her neutral special. I won 2 sudden deaths on stream with that alone. I'm also a big fan of the Phantom Attack, both for its effectiveness and the fact that it's a nod to underappreciated Zelda games. By the by, you really should play Spirit Tracks if you hadn't, it's a good time. While I'm sure there's actual minute differences that I don't notice while the rest of you do, I do agree that Ultimate is the best version of Zelda, if not for just her great design and her OP final smash. Peach and Daisy are great and all, but Zelda is how you really princess. It's one thing for Super Smash Bros. To bring underappreciated games into the spotlight, but it's another altogether to outright revive a franchise. This series did a lot of favors for Fire Emblem, but let's not forget that Pitt's appearance in Brawl was his first outing after about 20 years. And not only was a new Kid Icarus game made shortly after that using Pitt's and Palutena's new designs, but Sakurai himself, and his team, made the game. I just needed to take a second away from this Smash video to gush about how amazing of a game Kid Icarus Uprising is, and you either need to play the game yourself or Nintendo needs to figure out a Switch remaster. Anyway, Pitt is an adorable goober that is also a one-angel army, but how does that translate to Smash Bros? Actually, pretty well. There are a number of characters that can be considered more beginner-friendly than others, but Pitt in particular is a great beginner pick overall. Simple attacks to learn but still effective, great mobility and recovery, versatile specials, and a reliable final smash. In Ultimate. Not so much the previous games. He's unlockable in Ultimate, but even so, newbies can get a lot of mileage out of Pitt, and he can be formidable in determined hands. There may be stronger picks and other fighters may be more interesting, even as a beginner-friendly character, but you really can't go wrong with this captain. If only he could make time to learn how to read, though, then he'd really be unstoppable. If you thought Marth and Lucina should have been a tie, wait till you see this. You can't get more of a perfect example of a clone character than a character who is a literal imperfect clone. But let's be real here, Dark Pit was kind of entitled to a spot on the Smash Bros. Roster, considering his first appearance was as a palette swap for Pit back in Brawl. Of course, the question does persist. Why am I not making this a tie between the two? As with the Mario princesses, Pit and Dark Pit have no significant difference in general stats, so their strengths and weaknesses are the same. Thankfully, their specials in Final Smash do differ at least a little. Dark Pit's Silver Bow is slower, stronger, and less flexible than Pit's Palutena Bow, though I don't really use them enough for this to be a game changer. His side special, however, kind of is. Kind of. I make a bad habit of spamming the upper dash arm and electroshock arm, among other side specials, because it's a solid movement tool that dishes out quite a bit of damage and deflects projectiles. I can't remember exactly which was stronger or which had better launching power, but going off of looks, it has to be the biggest electroshock arm, right? On the flip side is their final smash. Dark Pit has his staff that functions like Link's ancient bow and arrow, and Zelda and Sheik's light arrow previously, and is extremely precise to hit. Pitt has the Lightning Chariot, which is way easier to target and hit people with. But the thing is, Final Smashes aren't all that common, even with the Final Smash meter in Ultimate. It's pretty slim margins, but a slightly better side special at least makes up enough for the dinky Final Smash for me to pick Gothface Pitt over the Goober. I'll never admit to not being illogical.